So now we move on to an Australian perspective, and I guess why we're here today, because Gregory did such a good job of constructing the Australian one and hosting the Australian Threatened Species Summit. So Gregory is Aboriginal, he's been a diplomat, he's got a deep love for nature, he's not a scientist, and I saw him working the room at the Kiwi2 birthday party last night, and he's fantastic with social media. So Gregory's got an ability to amplify the cause for threatened species in Australia like nobody else has ever had. And when I was with the CEOs of those federal agencies, they had nothing but praise for how Gregory has brought a cause to feral cats in Australia beyond anything they've seen. Kia ora, Gregory.
Well, could I start by acknowledging the Indigenous people here and thank you very sincerely for having me on your land in your country. Actually, something that I'm proud of as an Aboriginal Australian, but also as an Australian of shared ancestry, is the journey of reconciliation that both of our countries have gone on as developed countries with histories of colonisation. I think Australia and New Zealand should both be proud of themselves for how the journeys that we've gone on for reconciliation. Minister Barry, Minister for Conservation, Lou, Director General of DOC, Nicola, Threatened Species Ambassador, all of you, but also New Zealand's farmers that I met last night, all of New Zealand, thank you so much for having me here. It's a delight. It's an honour to be here at your Threatened Species Summit and to help you launch your strategy. And I should say, Lou said that you may be having this conference because of me. Well, actually, I wouldn't be doing the job I'm doing if it wasn't for you. Because actually, my former Minister, Greg Hunt, and Minister Barry came up with the idea of the Threatened Species Commissioner. So I thank you for the job that I fill now as well. And on that note, I can't think of two countries in the world that have a closer relationship than our two countries. We're different, but we really are close. We share a lot. My grandfather fought with your grandfathers in World War II. We share that Anzac spirit, and we share the values of freedom and democracy. There's nowhere else where I can get off the plane and feel more familiar and more welcome than I can here in New Zealand, respecting that it is a different country, of course. And something that I really enjoy sharing with New Zealand is the antipodean larrikinism that we have. And occasionally Nicola and I have to calm ourselves down before we have a meeting with Minister Barry in the Beehive. But actually that larrikinism is part of our identity. And that's something that I want to talk about today, because that's something that we also share, something that distinguishes us from pretty much anywhere else in the world, something that defines us. We both have this deep and extraordinary connection to our wildlife, our unique animals and plants that evolved separately over millions of years as we drifted up from Gondwana land. And I love looking and listening to responses to people from Europe when they see animals like this. They can't believe that Australia has animals like the bilby. This isolation from the rest of the world gave our animals and plants their distinctiveness, their uniqueness. 90% of Australia's animals and plants are found nowhere else on Earth. All of your lizards, all of your reptiles, all of your frogs, and all of your bats belong only to you. They're nowhere else on the planet. So we have a huge amount to love and to protect. And Sydney alone, as an example, has more eucalyptus tree species than all of the UK trees put together. And I noticed at Zealandia that you have 80,000 endemic species here in New Zealand, estimated. The UK has 2. So that endemism, that uniqueness is something really incredible. And that endemism leads us to define ourselves, Australians and New Zealanders, through our wildlife. We put a kangaroo on the tail of Qantas, a macropod. and I'll talk about it later. We've lost 8 macropods to extinction in Australia already and 16 more at risk. You put the silver fern on the tail of Air New Zealand. We call our rugby team the Wallabies. Our sporting flag is the boxing kangaroo flag. Yours is a silver fern. Our national carrier, Qantas, has a kangaroo, and you call yourselves Kiwis. I think that really explains so much. But also something that I really enjoy saying as a person of Aboriginal descent is that our animals and plants belong to all of us in modern Australia, and I'm sure that's the case here in New Zealand as well. That said, the animals and plants in Australia and New Zealand, of course, are immensely important to our Indigenous peoples, and they are shared by our Indigenous peoples with all of us. This man, Jacob, a friend of mine, he spends his life hunting feral cats to save those cute black-flanked rock wallabies. Another man who I knew in Alice Springs, an old man who's now passed away, he said when he died that all of the children born in Alice Springs Hospital are little Yeperenya dreaming babies. The dreaming is what you're born with in Australia, and the Yeperenya dreaming is the processionary caterpillar dreaming that all of the Aranda kids for millennia have inherited at birth. But that man shared that, and he said all of the children in Alice Springs Hospital, including my son who was born there, are Yeperenya babies because the dreaming doesn't care about the colour of your skin. So we share these animals and plants. In Australia and New Zealand, our national identities, our cultural psyches are inextricably linked, but we've been losing these animals and plants to extinction at unprecedented rates. Australia's lost 30 mammals since Europeans arrived. I've read that you've lost 75 birds since people arrived here about 800 years ago. We've both been enduring extinction crises, but we're wealthy countries, we're developed countries. We have really good environment protection laws and the rule of law and governance. So why is this happening? I don't need to tell you. It's happening because of the vulnerability of our species to invaders. And we have a lot of invaders in Australia. In Australia, we have 76 vertebrate or backboned invaders alone. And at the top of the list there, in terms of the impacts on our wildlife, is the feral cat. Our animals actually learnt to sit still, like your birds, in response to predators. Scientists call that predator naivety, but I don't like that term because it implies that it's our animals' fault, that there's something wrong with them. But it's not their problem, they're not the problem, the invaders are the problem. In Australia, feral cats have directly contributed to at least 22 of our 30 mammal extinctions, and they're implicated in another 6 of the total of 30. So they've been part of the extinction for 28 of our 30 mammals. They put pressure on another 124 Australian animals, and the science shows that each feral cat kills at least 3 to 4 and up to 20 native animals a day, from small insects to mid-sized wallabies. So they've spread across 99% of Australia, 99.8% of Australia. There are millions of cats from our highest mountain, Mount Kosciuszko, to the remotest deserts, doing untold damage, and each cat is killing at least 1,000 native Australian animals per year. And if you do the maths, it's billions of Australian animals dying every day, every year from feral cats. Millions and millions every day. These 2 men I know in the central deserts caught that 6.8 kilogram cat on the left-hand side there. They shot it, and this is what they found, the other half of that 5 kilogram wallaby in its stomach. So this is the carnage that Australia has been enduring. But the good news is that on both sides of the Tasman Sea, we've said enough's enough. On both sides of the Tasman Sea, our governments, our communities, and our peoples are taking action. I was appointed in 2014 as Australia's first ever Threatened Species Commissioner, I have the resolute backing of Minister Josh Frydenberg, the Minister for the Environment and Energy in Australia, to lead Australia's fight against extinction. In 2015, we published our first threatened species strategy. We've backed that to date with $211 million mobilised for over 1,000 projects across Australia that are turning species trajectories around. We have targets to control feral cats. We have targets to cull 2 million feral cats by 2020, to establish 5 predator-free islands like your Kapiti Island by 2020, 10 large predator-proof fenced areas by 2020, and 12 million hectares, nearly 3 times the size of Switzerland, of open landscape management. We also have targets to recover 20 of our mammals by 2020, like this eastern quoll, 20 of our birds, like the malleefowl, which is also an umbrella species for dozens of other reptiles, birds and mammals that share its habitat across 4 states in southern arid Australia. And 30 plants like the remarkable and absolutely stunning matchstick Banksia from Western Australia, and a very ambitious target to ensure all of our plants against extinction by 2020 through seed banking. Earlier this year, Minister Josh Frydenberg launched Australia's first threatened species prospectus, which has 50 projects worth over $50 million to draw in the private sector, an area where you're doing better than us and where Australia is catching up and you're leading is engaging the private sector. So this prospectus is an invitation for Australia's private sector to join us and join local communities. And just last week, he launched a $5 million Threatened Species Recovery Fund that will provide grants from $20,000 to $250,000 for local groups like the people we've been listening to today, who are fighting extinction by tackling the threats or saving the species. And here on this side of the Tasman Sea, you're certainly leading. You're inspiring. You definitely inspire me and Australia's ecologists, scientists and conservation groups, people on the ground, volunteers doing work. You've appointed a Threatened Species Ambassador, and with trademark New Zealand innovation style, half of her salary is funded by Air New Zealand. I keep tweeting Qantas about that, but I haven't heard from them yet. A third of New Zealand is national parks, and just last night I met farmers on the other 70% who are trapping feral cats and putting covenants on their land for species like the Australasian bittern, an endangered bird that you and we share together. A third of the world's Australasian bitterns are here, and the other 2/3 are in Australia. You're not afraid to make hard decisions, to be ambitious. Your battle for your birds, your strategic and unapologetic use of 1080 to protect the animals that belong here, your war on weeds and the dirty dozen, and your predator-free 2050 goal. This has given the evaders an eviction notice, and it may actually, you've given them plenty of warning, but you've started work now. And it states very clearly, we're not going to tolerate the cats, the rats, the stoats, the possums any longer. It's exciting, it's driving innovative change like eDNA, but it's also mobilising local communities across Australia, across New Zealand, in caravan parks, quarries, just right behind the hotel where I'm staying in Arrow Street. And finally today, you're publishing a threatened species strategy. And you're bringing these elements together in the strategy. You're harnessing an even greater level of action and commitment. And like our strategy, your strategy is going to arrest species decline and protect what belongs here. Importantly, it draws in the private sector, but also the wider community, local citizens, farmers, aunties, uncles as partners, as people that are delivering action, not just passively funding or supporting what's happening here. New Zealand, we in Australia congratulate you. We stand with you in your fight against extinction, and as Minister Barry states very clearly in the introduction of this strategy, if we're to save the creatures we love, We have to eliminate the predators that are eating them to extinction. In Australia, we're fighting the same battle, determinedly, and we're humanely, effectively and justifiably tackling the key threats like feral cats. Our remarkable animals and plants deserve no less. On both sides of the Tasman Sea, we've lost too much. On both sides here, we're saying enough's enough. We're tackling the invaders and putting the species that belong ahead. We're doing that for ourselves, we're doing that for our species, and we're doing it for our kids. Thank you.